business, religion, and politics. Business. He was a masterful businessman. He was what I call a people person. He dealt well with people. People tended to like him, wanted to come back to him, wanted to deal with him. He wasn't an abrasive kind of person that shut off others when he talked to them. So as a business person, he did well. And he made millions in his day, millions. What he gave away, we can trace $8 million that he gave away. And in order to know what $8 million means today, from the mid-1800s, you need to multiply it by something like 75. And you get an idea. He gave away somewhere around $700,000, or probably a lot more stuff we can't trace. A lot of what he gave away was just here, here. He'd give away money. He considered it to be a gift that he did not need. But he set up his family as well as he could. They had whatever they needed, but they were not allowed to have luxuries. His daughter wanted to have an elaborate wedding in 1843. He said, no, not on my money. And she really didn't. So he controlled the money and gave it away to people, and he gave it to people who were in some way oppressed. Now, who comes to mind immediately when you think of people that are oppressed? Slaves, women, poor people, sick people, someone who has just had a tragedy in their lives. If a farmer down the road in Fenner had a barn that burned down, he'd donate him enough money to rebuild the barn. Oswego had a big fire. I think it was about 1840. Not sure on that date, I have to look it up. And after the fire, he donated a huge amount of money to the city of Oswego to spread around to help business people rebuild. So that's where the money went. It didn't go, and it didn't go in large sums either. It went in small amounts. Because that's what he wanted. He didn't want any public renown for what he did. I frequently get the question, if this guy did so much, how come I never heard of him in the history books? That's what he wanted. He didn't want you to hear about him in the history books. He didn't donate money to any big university, so there was no Garrett Smith University anywhere, or city named after him, or even a street in a city. It just didn't happen that way because that's not what he wanted. The second major theme in his life was politics. One of the things that people think before much investigation into his life is that he was a politician. He was not. Emphatically, he was not. He hated it. He detested it. He used those words in his own writing about it. He didn't want anything to do with public life. He would support it. He would advocate that we should have a political party that would do something about abolishing slavery. But he didn't want to be a part of that as an active politician himself. So he wouldn't run for office. In spite of that, he was nominated for President of the United States 4 times. He was nominated for Governor of New York State 3 times. And a lot of other lesser offices also. Assemblyman, senator. And he didn't want any of them. He refused to campaign. He publicly wrote that he didn't want the office and didn't want people to vote for him. And in spite of all that, he actually got elected to Congress. He was elected in 1852 as an independent. He wasn't a part of any political party. As an independent to a seat in Congress from the district that included Oswego and Madison counties, right here. And when he was nominated for the position, he went right to the newspapers and said, don't nominate me. Please don't. Before he said, don't nominate me. When he said, don't vote for me. I don't want to go. And people thought, well, you can see what they thought of him. They elected him anyway. And he did go to Washington. He spent 1 year of his 2-year term in D.C., in the House of Representatives, as an abolitionist, and found out, you could guess this, I'll bet, that the Congress was so tightly controlled by pro-slavery congressmen and senators that he could have no influence there. And finding that out, he said, I can have more influence on abolition by going back to Peterborough and earning more money to give to the movement that way than I can by trying to get something done about it in Washington. So he quit and he came home. And he was never elected to anything else after that. But he did start something that's interesting. And we'll do this quickly rather than go through the history of it. He started the Liberty Party, which was a third party. The two major parties at the time in 1840, this happened, were the Democrats and the Whigs. Both of those parties were pro-slavery in the main. There were anti-slavery factions as a part of those parties, but most of their interest was pro-slavery. He wouldn't have anything to do with that. But he had by that time figured out that we need to do something about abolition through political means, so he started the Liberty Party, he and some other central New York folks. And the Liberty Party, over the next 8 to 10 years, had a lot of different moves. It split, it came back together, factions from the other parties joined in, and their only issue for the Liberty Party, guess it, is abolition, right? So all of the abolition factions from other parties eventually got together, and in 1854 they formed a new party called the Republican Party, which is still with us. So the Republican Party that we know actually had its origins in central New York through the major stimulus of Gerrit Smith and two other people in 1839 and 1840. And at that time, the Republicans were very, very radically liberal. The Human Rights Party. That's not so anymore, as I'm sure you realize. That switched during the late 1800s when the economics of trust building and hoarding money favored those people in power. And the Republicans came into power in the 1860s. They nominated Abraham Lincoln in 1860. There he is. So you know what happened after that. So they did have a major influence in ending slavery through politics. The other major theme in his life was religion. And there's a chapter there on that. And being disgusted with the fact that most of the Christian denominations at the time were pro-slavery. See, both the Christian denominations and the political parties were pro-slavery. I mean, how can you stop them? He started his own church. Started his own political party, which tended to work. So he started his own church. It's called the Free Church. And it's called free because it was free of any connections with any denomination. See, it wasn't Lutheran or Baptist or Episcopalian or Presbyterian or something like that. It was just free. Anybody that wanted to join it could join. You didn't have to uphold any particular doctrine. You just became a part of it. The third major reform effort that he got deeply involved in, and we'll go through this one as a conclusion here, was women's rights. If you would have been married in 1840, everything you had, every possession of yours, became automatically your husband's. To do anything with that he wished. You could own nothing as a wife. You were also supposed to be quiet. You couldn't speak in public. You weren't allowed to be members of political parties, etc. I mean, it was simply disempowered. They were disempowered. They were supposed to be supportive of men and whatever they did, but that's about it. Very subservient position. So he said, this is nuts. We're going to do something about this too. And he started to get involved in the women's movement, especially in accordance with the encouragement of somebody that he knew very well as his first cousin. Anybody know who that might be? Elizabeth Cady Stanton.